So let's start with, again, also move the elbow and your radioulnar joint. Again, if we're starting in that anatomical position here, palms facing forward, flexion is going to be coming up. So flexion of the elbow joint coming up, kind of like a bicep curl there. Coming up there. Extension going down. Okay, so if I'm doing a tricep extension, okay, that's straightening out your elbow. Tricep extension, elbow extension. And then we got supination and pronation. Remember, supination, okay, is when your palm turns up essentially, like you're holding a bowl of soup. Bowl of soup, supination. Pronation, palm goes down. Supination, palm up, pronation, palm down. And just so you understand it here, my elbow can be straight and I can go through supination and pronation. So my elbow doesn't have to be at the side. But the easiest way to think about it here is if you keep your elbow at your side bent, supination, palm is coming up, holding a bowl of soup. But if my elbow is extended, this is supination. If I went here, this is supination. Does that make sense there? Again, that happens, supination and pronation happens at the radioulnar joint. Okay. So again, the radius twists, and essentially it folds on top of the ulna when we go into pronation. Your packet of papers there, everybody should have that from last week. If I missed anybody. So again, that packet lists all the muscles and what actions they do for each joint of the body. So turn to the one that says at the top, elbow and radioulnar joints. That's the ones that we're going to talk about here in this unit. Again, in your atlas, what you've got is list of the actions and what muscles go with each action. This is just a different way to present it. So feel free to use it as much as you would like. So let's start here. Biceps brachii. We talked about it last week because, again, it crosses that shoulder joint. And because we already talked about the origin insertions, I'm not going to make you know the origin insertions for this week. However, notice it crosses that elbow joint in the front, so the biceps brachii is going to help with elbow flexion. So it helps with elbow flexion. In addition, notice it's a right shoulder. Okay, so my thumb is facing out here. Notice how the fibers kind of pull this way a little bit. So the biceps brachii also helps with supination. It's not only elbow flexion, but it also helps with supination. It's got two different actions there. Next one. Okay. Another B word, brachioradialis. Brachio meaning arm, radialis meaning radius. So notice here, starts at the top, okay, comes down, okay, to your radius. This one we will need to know origin insertion for. So the origin way up top is the lateral, because it's to the thumb side pointing out if we're looking at the anatomical position. So the lateral supracondylar ridge. It's going to come all the way down and insert at the styloid process. Styloid process there of your radius. Since the fibers go straight up and down, and since they cross that elbow joint, this also helps with flexion. So look again, brachioradialis, biceps brachii, both of those help with elbow flexion. But that's it. No supination and pronation for this. So again, we have biceps brachii starts with the letter B. Brachioradialis starts with the letter B. And to finish off the big baller brand, triple B, we got the brachialis. Again, this one you also will need to know origin insertion for. So again, it's going to start here, okay, closer to that distal portion of the anterior part of the humerus. More distal, okay, so not all the way up there, more distal. Okay. It's going to insert all the way at the bottom at the coronoid process of your ulna. So remember your ulna, it's got that jaw there. So essentially it inserts at that bottom jaw, okay, the coronoid process of your ulna. And just like the two B's before this, brachialis helps with elbow flexion. So triple B here. Biceps brachii, brachioradialis, and brachialis all help with elbow flexion. You only need to know origin insertion though for the brachioradialis and that brachialis there. Staying on the front here, pronator teres. Pronator teres. And again, the name gives away one of its actions. It's going to help with pronation of that radioulnar joint. And that should make sense. Notice here that the muscle fibers come at the diagonal. You will need to know origin insertion for this one. So notice here, it originates at that medial supracondylar ridge as well as the medial epicondyle. Picture doesn't show the medial epicondyle very well, but the medial supracondylar ridge, medial epicondyle, and the coronoid process again of your ulna. Then it comes diagonally across and inserts at the middle portion of your radius, more towards the lateral side of that radius. So the middle lateral portion of your radius. So it's going to help with pronation. And because it still crosses that elbow joint, it's also going to help with flexion. Questions on the pronator teres? Let's move to the back side. Anconius. Anconius here. So again, here's your lecnon process, the big pointy part of your elbow. Notice again, these muscle fibers cross your ulna and your humerus. So these are going to help with elbow extension. Elbow extension here. Do not need to know origin insertion for this one. Now this one's a little bit deceiving because the fibers are running diagonally. However, this attaches at the ulna, not the radius. If we go back here, biceps brachii, okay, inserts at the radius. Pronator teres inserts at the radius. This inserts on the ulna. And the ulna and the humerus create a hinge joint. With a hinge joint, remember, those movements can only occur in one plane. So there is no twisting movement that happens here with your ulna. Only the radius. Because again, notice the radius has got that top hat, so it can pivot. But since it's not attaching at all on your radius, the only thing the anconius can help out with is extension of your elbow. Triceps brachii. For this unit, don't worry about origin insertion. But again, notice all of them insert at that olecranon process. So the triceps brachii is going to help with elbow extension as well. Supinator. No origin insertion for this muscle. Partially because it looks really funky on the picture. I tried to find a good picture, couldn't find one. But supinator, name gives away what it does. This muscle helps with supination of that radioulnar joint. Helps with supination. Again, this muscle is on the back side, posterior side. Pulls it across there, we're looking at supination. Last one, Pronator quadratus. This one you will need to know origin and insertion for. Origin is going to be the distal fourth of your ulna. Insertion is going to be the distal fourth of your radius. So again, this one attaches at the radius. So we're thinking there's probably going to be some sort of supination or pronation here. So, and specifically, the name gives it away. Pronator, meaning it's going to help with pronation. Pronation here. Quadratus, if we're thinking four-sided shape, quad meaning four. It's a four-sided shape there. Any geometry nerds in here? Pronator quadratus helps with pronation. Origin there, the distal fourth of your ulna. Insertion, distal fourth of your radius. Again, no cadavers for this quiz coming up here. These are going to be the four that you do need to know origin and insertions for. These are going to be the 4 of the 10 that you're going to see next week. Unit 14, muscles that move the wrist and the hand. So let's start with the wrist here. Again, if I'm standing in that anatomical position, with any movements of your appendages, flexion is coming up, extension is going down. So, wrist flexion coming up. So wrist flexion coming up. Kind of like we're thinking Chef Curry shooting that three-pointer. This would be wrist flexion. Flexion coming up there. Extension going down. Extension going down. Then we got radial and ulnar deviation. Radial deviation, remember radius is on your thumb side, so radial deviation is going to be start, finish, moving to your thumb side. Ulnar deviation, moving to that pinky. Remember, pinky, ulna, P-U, that stinks. Pinky starts with letter P, ulna, letter U, P-U. So ulnar deviation, coming this direction. Flexion of the wrist and extension of the wrist, that happens in the sagittal plane. Radial deviation and ulnar deviation occur in the frontal plane. And again, we should have this packet here showing a list of all the muscles that move the wrist and what action they do. Also though, we've got muscles that move our fingers and our thumb. Let's start with the fingers here. Again, starting in that anatomical position. Finger flexion coming up, finger extension going down. Think finger flexion like you're grabbing a baseball bat. Finger flexion, finger extension. Also, going away is going to be finger abduction, abduction like you're getting abducted by aliens. Coming together is going to be a deduction, adding together. Abduction, adduction. Fingers are pretty straightforward. Finger flexion, finger extension. Notice here that occurs in the sagittal plane. Abduction, adduction, that occurs in the frontal plane. However, thumb movements get a little bit trickier. The way I want you to think about it here is pretend, okay, your hand here, all the way up here, this is your body. Just like this is my body. This is your body. So if I got here, finger flexion, okay, watch my thumb here, it's going to be coming up. Might be a little bit easier to see here. So finger flexion, or thumb flexion is coming up. If I look at it from this view, thumb flexion coming directly across like a windshield wiper. Extension is going out. Thumb extension. And again, if we're at this position here, thumb extension going down. Thumb extension. abduction and adduction. Okay? So starting here, abduction, abduction, coming directly out. Adduction, coming in, adding in. Abduction out, adduction in. Notice that's different than thumb flexion and extension. Abduction, adduction. Lastly, we got opposition, and that's when you bring your thumb to the opposite side of your hand to try to touch your fifth finger. Thumb opposition. Again, you should have this there in your packet. It just helps explain all the different muscles and their actions of the fingers in the top part, and the thumb in the bottom part. Specifically talking about the muscles. I grouped them a little bit differently maybe than what's written in your manual there. And that's because I wanted to kind of group them a little bit more by what kind of action they perform. These first three, flexor carpi radialis, flexor carpi ulnaris, palmaris longus, okay, they all are very similar. They're all similar because they all lie on the anterior part of your forearm. They all provide flexion. These ones are very specific, but this one should make sense again because that muscle is crossing your wrist there in the front. So they're going to help with flexion. And specifically, they're going to help with flexion of the wrist. They're all helping with flexion of the wrist. And that should make sense. If we look at the names of these two muscles here, flexor carpi radialis, flexor carpi ulnaris. Carpi stands for carpal bones. Remember, your carpal bones are kind of those irregular bones that are kind of like mashed up against each other that make up your wrist. So these two muscles here, they insert closer to those carpal bones. Insert closer to those carpal bones there. And again, carpi meaning wrist, so that means they're going to provide with wrist flexion. Let's get a little more specific about what those originating insertions are. So all three of these muscles are going to originate all the way up top here at that medial epicondyle. All three, if you notice here, we'll need to know origin insertions. They all originate at that medial epicondyle. The one addition, this here, is also, the picture doesn't do a very good job with it, but that one also originates at the olecranon process. And the video is going to show it a little bit better, but if you click on the video, you'll see a side view of it. Essentially, it wraps around and also originates at the olecranon process. But all three originate at that medial epicondyle, with the one addition for the flexor carpi ulnaris, it also originates at the olecranon process. Insertions, they're all going to insert somewhere here in the palm. Specifically, flexor carpi radialis, it's going to insert at the base of your second and third metacarpals. The picture only shows the second one, but this one's going to insert at the second and third, the base of those metacarpal bones. Flexor carpi ulnaris is going to insert at the base of the fifth metacarpal. However, it also inserts at the hamate and the pisiform, two of the bone of your carpal bones. Palmaris longus, palm, should kind of give you an idea that this is on the front side. It's going to insert somewhere at your palm. And specifically, this band of connective tissue, this bigger band of connective tissue here, that's called your palmar aponeurosis. that right there? Palmar aponeurosis. Apologize for the pronunciation. And again, this is this band, triangular band of connective tissue that ultimately are going to insert it at the heads of your second through fifth metacarpal bones. But you don't need to know specifically second through fifth, just know palmar aponeurosis. And again, that should make sense. Palmar, palmaris. Now, all three of these help with wrist flexion. They help with wrist flexion there. However, these two help with a couple other things, and the name gives it away. Flexor carpi radialis is going to help with radial deviation as well. And the opposite for flexor carpi ulnaris, it's going to help with ulnar deviation. So all three help with wrist flexion. This one helps with ulnar deviation, and the name gives it away. This one helps with radial deviation. Again, know the origin insertions for these three muscles. These three do not need to know origin and insertion, just know action. And again, the name gives away what the action is going to be. Digitorum, thinking digits. Digits here. So this is saying, this is going to flex the fingers. Flexor digitorum superficialis. Okay. This muscle is on top of the flexor digitorum profundus. But again, both have flexor digitorum in, so they're going to all help with finger flexion. All help with finger flexion. Flexor pollicis longus. Pollicis. That looks like the word pollex. Pollex, P-O-L-L-E-X. We talked about it in the bones unit, but the pollex refers to the thumb. So this muscle is saying, I'm going to flex my thumb. So again, thumb flexion, okay, it's going from here directly across. Thumb flexion. Next three. So these, again, were palm side, okay, on the front of your forearm. If I flip my arm over, these three, okay, they're going to be on the back side when standing in the anatomical position of your forearm. So they're going to be on this side, part of the back of your hand. They're on this side here. These three you will need to know origin and insertion for. But essentially what these do is they just do the exact opposite actions of these three. Exact opposite actions. So all three of these are going to help with wrist extension. And that should, the name should give it away. Again, carpi, meaning carpal bones. Okay, carpal bones are in your wrist. Carpi, wrist. Carpi, wrist. So all three of these are going to help with wrist extension. You will need to know origin and insertion for it. Now, unlike the flexor ones we talked about, where they're going to originate at that medial epicondyle, all three of these muscles are going to originate at the lateral epicondyle. So they all share that same thing. All originate at the lateral epicondyle. Insertions are a little bit easier to remember. So, for the extensor carpi radialis longus, the base of your second metacarpal. For the radialis brevis, that's the base of your third metacarpal. And carpi ulnaris, base of your fifth metacarpal. So they all help with wrist extension. But again, just like the other three, we see radialis, we're thinking radial deviation. So these two muscles here help with radial or thumb side deviation. So start, finish. Likewise, ulnaris, okay, going to the ulna side. Okay. So this is going to help with ulnar deviation. So again, these three are the last three from this unit here that you need to know for origin and insertion. The rest you're not going to need to know that. So just like with our flexor muscles, okay, extensor digitorum, we're talking with finger extension. Finger extension. These two here, okay, extensor pollicis meaning pollex, which refers to your thumb, okay, extending the thumb, both the longest and the brevis. They help with thumb extension. So again, that's start, finish. Start, finish. If you're looking here, start, finish. That's finger or thumb extension. Start, finish. These three, again, no origin and insertion for these three, but they help with abduction and adduction. And specifically with the pollex. All three, notice, they have pollicis in it. Okay, so we're thinking thumb. They help with abduction and adduction of the thumb. So this one here, okay, abduction of your thumb. The adductor pollicis longus. So if I'm looking, so abduction, start, finish. So that's what the adductor pollicis longus helps with. Start, finish. Start, finish. Abduction. These ones are going to be on the palm side. Oh, and this one here, so right here, coming here, this is going to help with abduction as well. Start, finish. So that's the abductor pollicis brevis. Longus is a lot longer, notice. Brevis is a little bit more brief. Briefer, shorter. This one, the adductor pollicis, that's the big old honking meaty part here between your thumb and your second finger. Again, that's going to help with start, finish, adduction. Start, finish, adding in. Start, finish. So it's going to add in. Last three. First one here. Opponens pollicis. Okay. Opposition of your thumb. So again, this muscle, it's lying right here. It's going to help with this action. It's going to help with opposition. Opponens pollicis. Pollicis meaning pollex. Helps with opposition. Last two, interossei. Interossei. And you see that inter meaning between. Okay? And essentially this is connective tissue between essentially your metacarpal bones. Okay? We had interossei, the interosseous membrane between your radius and your ulna. We talked a little bit about that. Okay? Same thing with your metacarpals. So again, we got muscles on the inside. We've got palmar interossei, so these are more in front. Dorsal, meaning backside interossei, these are more in the back. Notice here the palmar interossei, they originate and insert on the same numbered metacarpal and phalange. Versus these ones here, the dorsal interossei, they're between two metacarpals, and then they insert at the one that's closer to the middle. All right, looking at palmar interossei here. Palmar interossei, that's going to help with adduction. So it pulls like this, okay, helps bring the fingers together. So adduction of the fingers, adding in. Notice these ones, they pull out. They pull out. So dorsal interossei help with abduction. Abduction. And here's how I like to think about it. If any of you had cats or dogs, okay, you take them out of their, with the dog, you take it out of their crate, or if the cat just wakes up, they'll go and they'll stretch out. Okay. So they stretch. When I extend my fingers, extending them, my fingers naturally come apart. So they're extending, they're going closer to the dorsal part of my hand. So therefore the dorsal interossei are going to help with abduction. Versus palmar interossei, if I'm holding something, okay, got something in my palm like a baseball, I'm going to grip it so my fingers are going to come together. So palmar interossei helping with adduction. Adduction, bringing your fingers together. Again, no cadavers, but these three and these three, those are going to be other six that you need to know for origins and insertions.